I was standing in my kitchen making coffee on a Tuesday morning when someone started pounding on my front door like they were trying to break it down, and I knew immediately it was going to be one of those days. Through the peephole, I could see Karen Montgomery, the president of our Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association in Scottsdale, Arizona, standing on my porch with her arms crossed and her signature scowl plastered across her face. She was flanked by two other HOA board members I vaguely recognized from the monthly meetings I religiously avoided. I took a deep breath, set down my coffee mug, and opened the door. "Lucas Davidson," Karen announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to conduct an immediate inspection of your property." I leaned against the doorframe, keeping my body positioned to block any attempt at entry. "Good morning to you too, Karen. What's this about?" "We received a complaint that you're running an illegal business out of your home," she said, pulling out a clipboard like it was some kind of badge of authority. "According to our HOA covenants, Section 12, subsection 4, no commercial activities are permitted in residential properties without prior board approval." I couldn't help but laugh. "A complaint from whom?" "That's confidential," Karen snapped. "Now, you need to let us in immediately so we can verify compliance with HOA regulations." The two board members behind her, a balding man named Richard and a nervous-looking woman whose name I couldn't remember, shuffled their feet uncomfortably. Richard was holding a tablet, probably ready to take notes or photos. The woman kept glancing between Karen and me like she'd rather be anywhere else. "I'm not letting you into my home," I said calmly. "You have no legal authority to demand entry to my private property." Karen's face turned an impressive shade of red. "I have every authority. I'm the HOA president, and you signed the covenants when you purchased this home. That gives me the right to inspect for violations." This was where things got interesting. "Actually, Karen, that's not how property law works. I'm a constitutional lawyer, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that signing HOA covenants doesn't grant you unlimited access to my home. You need my consent, and you don't have it. You're refusing to cooperate." Karen's voice went up an octave. "That's an automatic violation. Richard, write that down. Refusal to comply with HOA inspection request." Richard fumbled with his tablet, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Write whatever you want," I said. "But you're not coming into my home without a warrant or my permission, and you're definitely not getting either." Karen stepped closer, her face now inches from mine. "If you don't let us in right now, we'll fine you $500 per day until you comply. And we'll place a lien on your property." I felt my jaw tighten. This woman had crossed a line from annoying to potentially criminal. "Karen, listen very carefully. What you're attempting right now is trespassing. I've told you that you don't have permission to enter. If you try to force your way in, I'll call the police and press charges." "You can't press charges against the HOA," Karen shrieked. "We're a legally recognized entity." "Being a legally recognized entity doesn't exempt you from criminal law," I explained, my voice getting harder. "Attempted trespassing is a crime in Arizona. So is threatening to place fraudulent liens on someone's property. You're dangerously close to multiple violations right now." The nervous woman behind Karen tugged on her sleeve. "Maybe we should consult with our lawyer first." "We don't need a lawyer," Karen shook her off. "Mr. Davidson, you have until 5 p.m. today to allow us access, or we're entering anyway. I have a master key to every property in this community." My blood went cold. "Excuse me, you have a key to my house?" "Every HOA president receives master keys when they take office," Karen said smugly. "It's for emergencies. Did you just threaten to unlawfully enter my home using a key I never authorized you to have?" I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app. "Could you repeat that for the record?" Karen's eyes widened as she realized what I was doing. "You can't record me without my permission. Arizona is a one-party consent state," I said. "I only need my own permission to record this conversation." "And you just admitted to planning an illegal entry. That's attempted burglary, Karen." Richard stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Look, maybe we all need to calm down here. We don't want any legal trouble." "Then I suggest you and your colleagues leave my property immediately," I said, still recording. "And Karen, if you or anyone else tries to enter my home without my permission, I will pursue criminal charges and civil litigation." Karen's face contorted with rage. "You think you're so smart because you're a lawyer. We have lawyers too, and our covenants are ironclad. You agreed to reasonable inspections." "Reasonable inspections with proper notice and cause," I corrected. "You've provided neither. An anonymous complaint isn't sufficient cause, and banging on my door at 8 in the morning isn't proper notice." "Fine," Karen spun on her heel. "You'll be hearing from our attorney, and your fine starts today. That's $500 you owe the HOA." I watched them storm down my driveway. Richard looked back once, his expression apologetic. The nervous woman was practically running to keep up with Karen's angry stride. I closed the door and immediately called my colleague, Marcus Chen, who specialized in property law. "Marcus, I need your brain for a minute," I said when he picked up. "Lucas, it's 8 in the morning. What happened?" I explained the situation while I paced around my living room. Marcus listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "She actually threatened to enter your home without permission and admitted to having unauthorized keys, all recorded on my phone." "Beautiful. That's attempted criminal trespassing at minimum, possibly attempted burglary depending on intent. The key thing is a whole separate issue. Did you ever sign anything authorizing them to keep keys to your property?" I pulled up my documents on my laptop, scrolling through the closing papers from when I'd bought the house 3 years ago. "Nothing. The only key clause is that they can request copies of garage door codes in case of emergencies like fires or floods, but it requires written request and consent. Then they're holding unauthorized keys to your property. That could be a criminal matter too." Marcus paused. "What's this business she was talking about?" "That's the kicker. I don't have a business. I work from home as an independent contractor sometimes, doing legal consultations, but that's not a commercial business under any reasonable definition. Half the neighborhood works from home. So it's a pretext. She wanted in for some other reason. That's what I'm thinking." I looked around my house, trying to figure out what could have triggered this. My home was neat, well-maintained, and completely unremarkable. I didn't have any violations. My lawn was green. My fence was the approved height and color, and I'd never received any complaints. "You want to go after them?" Marcus asked. "Absolutely. This is harassment and it's illegal. I'm not letting some power-hungry HOA president think she can violate constitutional rights because she has a clipboard. I love when you get righteous. Okay, here's what we do. File a restraining order immediately to prevent any unauthorized entry. Then we send a cease and desist letter demanding they surrender all unauthorized keys. After that, we can discuss filing criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. Attempted trespassing, harassment, what else? Intentional infliction of emotional distress, potentially. Violation of privacy rights. And if they actually levy those fines or try to place a lien, that's fraud and possibly extortion. We can build a solid case." I felt better having a plan. "Thanks, Marcus. I'll draft the restraining order this morning." Send it to me before you file. I want to make sure it's airtight. And Lucas, document everything. Every interaction, every letter, every email. This could get ugly. He wasn't wrong. After hanging up, I spent the next 2 hours drafting a comprehensive restraining order and writing a detailed account of that morning's encounter. I included timestamps, direct quotes, and a transcript of my recording. By the time I finished, I had a 15-page document that would make any judge take notice. At noon, my doorbell rang again. This time, I checked the security camera I'd installed last year. It was a courier with a certified letter. I opened the door and signed for it, already knowing what it would say. The letter was from Thomas Bradley, attorney at law, representing the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. It informed me that I was being fined $500 per day for refusing to allow a mandatory inspection, and that I had 72 hours to pay the initial fine of $500 or face additional penalties, including a lien on my property. I photographed the letter and emailed it to Marcus with the subject line, "They're faster than I expected." He called me immediately. "This is perfect. They're digging their own grave." "How so?" "They're levying fines without any hearing, without proper notice, and without legitimate cause. That violates their own covenants and Arizona HOA law. We can get this thrown out and use it as evidence of harassment." I filed the restraining order that afternoon at the Maricopa County Courthouse. The judge who reviewed it, Judge Patricia Hendricks, was someone I'd worked with before. She read through my documentation carefully, her expression growing more severe with each page. "Mr. Davidson, this HOA president admitted to having unauthorized keys to your home." "Yes, Your Honor, and threatened to use them to enter without my permission." "That's deeply concerning." She signed the temporary restraining order without hesitation. "This prevents the HOA and its representatives from entering or attempting to enter your property without your explicit written consent. I'm also ordering them to surrender all keys to your property within 48 hours. We'll have a hearing in 2 weeks to determine if this should become permanent. Thank you, Your Honor. One more thing," she added. "Have you filed a police report about the unauthorized keys?" "Not yet. You should consider it. If someone is holding keys to your home without authorization and has threatened to use them, that's a serious matter." I left the courthouse and drove straight to the Scottsdale Police Department. The officer at the desk, a young guy named Officer Torres, listened to my story with growing interest. "So she told you she has a master key to your house, and she threatened to use it?" "That's correct. I have it recorded if you need to hear it." He called over his supervisor, Sergeant Davis, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. I explained everything again and played the recording. Sergeant Davis's expression darkened when she heard Karen's threat. "This is attempted criminal trespassing," she said. "Possibly conspiracy to commit burglary. We need to file a formal report and investigate this." I spent the next hour giving a detailed statement. Sergeant Davis was thorough, asking about the history with the HOA, whether there had been previous incidents, and what I thought motivated this behavior. I answered honestly, admitting I had no idea why Karen had suddenly decided to target me. "We'll send an officer to speak with Miss Montgomery," Sergeant Davis said, "and we'll need her to surrender those keys. If she actually attempts to enter your property, call 911 immediately." "Will do." I went home feeling like I'd set something significant in motion. That evening, I received an email from the HOA's lawyer, Thomas Bradley. It was professionally written but had an undercurrent of hostility. "Mr. Davidson, I represent the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. Your refusal to comply with a reasonable inspection request is a clear violation of your covenants. The fines levied against you are legitimate, and will continue to accrue until you allow the inspection. Furthermore, filing a restraining order against the HOA board is an abuse of the legal system, and we will be seeking sanctions against you for frivolous litigation. I strongly suggest you drop this matter and cooperate before it escalates further. I replied within 30 minutes. Mr. Bradley, I am a constitutional lawyer, and I can assure you there is nothing frivolous about protecting my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches. Your client threatened to enter my home without permission using unauthorized keys, which constitutes attempted criminal trespassing and potentially attempted burglary. I have filed a police report, and the matter is under investigation. The fines are illegitimate, and any attempt to collect them or place a lien will be met with additional legal action. I suggest you advise your client to comply with the restraining order and surrender all unauthorized keys to my property immediately. Regards, Lucas Davidson, Esq. The next morning, I woke up to find my front yard decorated with a large yellow sign that read, HOA violation in bold black letters. I walked outside in my pajamas and examined it. The sign had been staked into my lawn sometime during the night, and it listed my address along with failure to comply with inspection. I took multiple photos from different angles, then pulled the sign out and brought it inside. This was harassment, plain and simple. I called Sergeant Davis. They're escalating, she said. This is good evidence of their harassment. Keep the sign and document when you found it. Should I expect more of this? Probably. People like this don't back down easily, but they're making mistakes which works in your favor. She was right. Over the next 3 days, I received daily letters from Thomas Bradley threatening increased fines, now claiming I owed $1,500. I also received a notice that the HOA would be holding an emergency board meeting to discuss my continued violations and my hostile behavior toward board members. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend preparing my case, organizing all my evidence into a comprehensive presentation. Marcus agreed to come as co-counsel, and together we built an argument that was impossible to ignore. On Monday, the day before the hearing, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Mr. Davidson, this is Linda Foster. I'm on the HOA board, the woman who was with Karen the other day. I remembered her, the nervous one who'd suggested consulting a lawyer. What can I do for you, Miss Foster? I need to talk to you. Can we meet somewhere? Not at your house or anywhere in the neighborhood, maybe a coffee shop. Her voice was shaking. Something was very wrong. Are you okay? No, I'm not. Please, can we meet? We agreed to meet at a Starbucks in downtown Scottsdale at 4 p.m. I arrived early and grabbed a corner table where we could talk privately. Linda showed up exactly on time, looking around nervously before sitting down. Thank you for meeting me, she said, clutching her coffee cup. I need to tell you what's really going on. I'm listening. Karen has been planning this for weeks. The complaint about you running a business, it wasn't real. She made it up. I kept my expression neutral. Why? Because you're a lawyer and she's afraid of you. Last year, when the Johnsons tried to fight the HOA over that stupid fence dispute, Karen mentioned that having a lawyer in the neighborhood made her nervous. She said lawyers know how to cause trouble. So this is preemptive harassment. Linda nodded miserably. She wanted to find something, anything, to use against you. She thought if she could get inside your house, she'd find some kind of violation. Then she could levy fines and make your life difficult enough that you'd just move. I felt cold anger spreading through my chest. That's conspiracy to commit fraud and multiple other crimes. I know. That's why I'm here. I can't be part of this anymore. When the police came to talk to Karen about the keys, she lied to them. She said she didn't have keys to individual properties, only to common areas. But I know that's not true. She showed me the key cabinet in her office. There are keys to dozens of homes. Dozens? I leaned forward. Why? The previous HOA president, Gerald Thompson, he had them made years ago without telling anyone. He called it an emergency access system. When he died 2 years ago, Karen found them and kept them. She's been using them to enter people's homes when they're not there. My mind raced. Has she stolen anything? I don't think so. She just likes to snoop. She's looking for violations, but it's illegal, isn't it? Extremely. That's burglary, breaking and entering, invasion of privacy. Linda, are you willing to testify to this? She hesitated, tears forming in her eyes. If I do, she'll destroy me. She'll kick me off the board, she'll make my life hell. But I can't sleep at night knowing what she's doing. This isn't what HOAs are supposed to be about. I can protect you, I said. If you testify, you'll be a witness in a criminal case. Any retaliation would be witness tampering, which is a felony, and I'll file a restraining order to protect you if necessary. Linda wiped her eyes. Okay. I'll do it. But there's more. Karen has been embezzling HOA funds. Now that was interesting. How much? I'm not sure exactly. But she's been approving payments to fake vendors for landscaping and maintenance that never happened. I think it's at least $30,000 over the past year. Do you have proof? I have copies of the financial records. I'm the treasurer, so I have access to everything. I've been documenting it because I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what to do with the information. Give it to me. All of it. This changes everything. Linda pulled a thumb drive from her purse. It's all here. Financial records, emails, meeting minutes where Karen talked about targeting you. Everything. I took the thumb drive like it was made of gold. Linda, you're doing the right thing. This woman is a criminal and she needs to be stopped. I know. I just hope I don't regret this. We talked for another hour. Linda told me about other homeowners Karen had targeted over the years, people who'd eventually given up and moved away rather than fight. She told me about board meetings where Karen had bullied and intimidated anyone who disagreed with her. By the time we left, I had a complete picture of systemic abuse and corruption. That evening, I went through every file on Linda's thumb drive. The evidence was damning. Karen had created fake invoices from landscaping companies, maintenance contractors, and pool services. The payments had all been deposited into accounts that, based on the routing numbers, didn't belong to legitimate businesses. I'd need to subpoena the bank records to prove where the money actually went, but it was clear this was fraud. The emails were even worse. Karen had written to Richard and another board member about her plan to get rid of the lawyer problem by finding violations and making my life difficult. She'd specifically mentioned using the keys to do a thorough inspection when he's not home. I called Marcus. We need to bring criminal charges. This isn't just about the attempted trespassing anymore. What did you find? I explained everything Linda had told me and the evidence on the thumb drive. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Lucas, this is serious. We're talking about burglary, fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. This woman could go to prison. Good. She should. She's been terrorizing people in this neighborhood for years. Okay. Tomorrow at the restraining order hearing, we present what we have and ask the judge to refer it to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. In the meantime, I'll start drafting a civil complaint. You can sue her personally and the HOA for damages. What kind of damages are we talking about? Emotional distress, invasion of privacy, fraud. Given the evidence of systematic targeting, we could argue for punitive damages too. We're probably looking at a 6-figure settlement if they're smart enough to settle before trial. The restraining order hearing the next day was supposed to be routine, but it turned into something much bigger. Judge Hendricks presided, and the courtroom was more crowded than I'd expected. Karen was there with Thomas Bradley, looking confident and angry. Linda sat on my side of the room, pale but determined. Richard was there too, sitting in the back, looking miserable. Thomas Bradley stood up first. "Your Honor, this restraining order is completely unnecessary and represents harassment of my client. The HOA has a legitimate interest in ensuring compliance with community covenants, and Mr. Davidson has been unreasonably hostile to reasonable requests." Judge Hendricks looked unimpressed. "Mr. Bradley, your client admitted to holding unauthorized keys to Mr. Davidson's property and threatened to use them to enter without permission. That's not a reasonable request, that's a crime. Your Honor, the keys are for emergency access only, and Miss Montgomery never intended to actually use them without cause. Then, why did she threaten to use them?" The judge looked at her notes. According to the transcript Mr. Davidson provided, Miss Montgomery explicitly stated she would enter his property with or without his permission. "That's a threat, Counselor." I stood up. "Your Honor, if I may, new evidence has come to light that significantly expands the scope of this case." Judge Hendricks gestured for me to continue. I presented everything: the thumb drive contents, Linda's testimony, the pattern of harassment and fraud. Bradley's face went from confident to horrified as I spoke. Karen's face turned white, then red, then white again. "Your Honor," I concluded, "this is not a simple HOA dispute. This is systematic criminal behavior including burglary, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. I'm requesting that this matter be immediately referred to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation." Judge Hendricks turned to Karen. "Miss Montgomery, did you enter Mr. Davidson's property or any other property without permission using these keys?" Thomas Bradley stood up quickly. "Your Honor, I advise my client not to answer that question. I'm not asking as part of a criminal proceeding, Counselor. I'm asking to determine the scope of this restraining order." Karen's voice was barely a whisper. "I never entered his property." "What about other properties?" the judge pressed. "Your Honor," Bradley interjected again, "I need to confer with my client." "No," Judge Hendricks said firmly, "I've heard enough. The restraining order is granted and made permanent. Miss Montgomery and all HOA representatives are prohibited from entering Mr. Davidson's property for any reason without his explicit written permission. All keys must be surrendered to Mr. Davidson within 24 hours. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office for investigation into possible criminal violations. Miss Foster, please approach." Linda walked to the front, trembling. The judge spoke to her kindly. "Miss Foster, thank you for coming forward. Your testimony is crucial. I'm issuing a protective order that prohibits any retaliation against you for your cooperation in this matter. If anyone from the HOA threatens you or attempts to remove you from the board in retaliation, they will be held in contempt of this court." Karen finally lost her composure. "This is ridiculous. I run that HOA and I can remove anyone I want. Miss Montgomery, I suggest you stop talking," Judge Hendricks said coldly. "You're in enough trouble already. This hearing is adjourned." We walked out of the courthouse into bright Arizona sunshine. Linda was crying, partly from relief, partly from fear about what came next. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. "That went better than expected." "It's not over yet," I said. "The criminal investigation is just beginning." I was right. The district attorney's office moved quickly. Within a week, Detective Sarah Martinez from the White Collar Crime Division contacted me for a detailed interview. I brought all my evidence, including the thumb drive from Linda and my recordings of Karen's threats. Detective Martinez was thorough and professional. "Mr. Davidson, based on what you've provided, we're looking at multiple felonies: burglary, fraud, embezzlement, computer crimes if she accessed homeowner information without authorization. This is going to be a significant case." "What about the other board members? We'll investigate their involvement. If they were aware of the fraud and didn't report it, they could be charged as accessories. But from what Miss Foster told us, it seems like Miss Montgomery acted alone for the most part." Over the next month, I watched as Karen's world crumbled. The district attorney's office executed a search warrant on her home and found the key cabinet Linda had mentioned. There were keys to 43 properties in the Meadowbrook Hills community, none of which had been authorized by the homeowners. They also found financial records showing that Karen had embezzled over $75,000 from the HOA over 3 years. The evidence of unauthorized entries was harder to prove, but Detective Martinez was clever. She interviewed homeowners who'd complained about items being moved or things feeling off in their homes when they returned from vacation. Several people reported small objects being displaced or doors being left unlocked that they were certain they'd locked. One couple had a security camera system that had mysteriously been unplugged during their absence. The district attorney charged Karen with 19 counts including burglary, attempted burglary, fraud, embezzlement, computer crimes, and conspiracy. The local news picked up the story, running headlines about the HOA president from hell and the Scottsdale HOA scandal. My phone rang constantly with reporters wanting interviews and other homeowners wanting to share their stories. One elderly man told me that Karen had entered his home while he was recovering from surgery and rearranged his garage, claiming it was an HOA violation. When he'd complained, she'd fined him $1,000 for having an unsafe and cluttered garage. I filed my civil lawsuit against Karen personally and the HOA as an entity. Marcus and I crafted a complaint that detailed every violation, every threat, every illegal action. We sued for invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraud, conspiracy, and violation of constitutional rights. We asked for compensatory damages, punitive damages, and attorney's fees. The HOA's insurance company took one look at the evidence and immediately moved to settle. They didn't want this anywhere near a jury. We negotiated back and forth for 3 weeks before reaching an agreement. The HOA would pay me $250,000, issue a formal apology, implement new governance policies to prevent future abuse, and cover all my attorney's fees. Karen would be permanently banned from serving on the board or holding any position of authority in any HOA in Arizona. Karen's criminal trial was scheduled for 6 months later. Thomas Bradley had dropped her as a client when the extent of her crimes became clear, and she'd been forced to hire a public defender. The evidence against her was overwhelming. I attended the trial, sitting in the gallery watching justice unfold. The prosecution laid out a devastating case. They had the fake invoices, the embezzled funds, testimony from Linda and other board members, evidence of unauthorized entry into multiple homes, and my recordings of her threats. Karen's defense tried to argue that she'd been following HOA policies and that the financial irregularities were accounting errors. The jury wasn't buying it. After 2 weeks of testimony, they deliberated for just 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 19 counts. The sentencing hearing was emotional. Several homeowners gave victim impact statements, describing how Karen's abuse of power had affected their lives. The elderly man whose garage had been rearranged broke down crying as he described feeling violated in his own home. A single mother talked about being fined thousands of dollars for trivial violations, while Karen was stealing from the HOA budget. I gave a statement too. Your Honor, what Karen Montgomery did wasn't just about breaking laws. It was about betraying a fundamental trust. Homeowners associations exist to protect property values and maintain community standards. Instead, Miss Montgomery turned ours into an instrument of terror and oppression. She violated the sanctity of people's homes, stole from the community she was supposed to serve, and used her position to harass and intimidate anyone who disagreed with her. This wasn't just bad judgment. This was systematic, intentional criminal behavior that deserves serious consequences. Judge Robert Chen, who presided over the criminal trial, listened carefully to everyone who spoke. When it came time for sentencing, his voice was stern. Miss Montgomery, you held a position of trust, and you violated that trust in the worst possible way. You entered people's homes without permission. You stole from the community you were elected to serve, and you used your power to bully and harass innocent people. These crimes strike at the heart of what it means to feel safe in your own home. I'm sentencing you to 8 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. You will also be required to pay full restitution to the HOA and to the individual victims, including Mr. Davidson. Karen sobbed as she was led away in handcuffs. I felt no satisfaction in her tears, only relief that it was finally over. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA underwent a complete restructuring. Linda Foster became the new president, and together with a reformed board, they implemented policies requiring transparency, limiting board authority, and protecting homeowner rights. The unauthorized keys were destroyed in a ceremony that several local news stations covered. New covenants were drafted that explicitly prohibited entry onto private property without written consent and established clear procedures for any inspections. I received my settlement check and donated half of it to a legal aid organization that helps homeowners fight abusive HOAs. The other half went into my savings, a reminder of why constitutional rights matter even in the mundane context of neighborhood associations. 6 months after the trial, I was working in my home office when someone knocked on my door. It was Linda, holding a plate of cookies. I wanted to thank you, she said, for everything, for standing up to Karen, for protecting me, for helping us fix the HOA. I took the cookies gratefully. You were brave to come forward. None of this would have happened without you. I couldn't have done it without knowing you'd protect me. She smiled, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. The neighborhood is actually pleasant now. People aren't afraid anymore. We talked for a while about the changes she'd implemented, the positive feedback from homeowners, and her plans for the future of the HOA. When she left, I looked around my home, my private sanctuary that Karen Montgomery had tried to violate, and felt genuinely grateful for the legal system that had protected it. The story made national news, picked up by outlets discussing HOA overreach and abuse of power. I did a few interviews, always emphasizing the same points. HOAs serve an important function, but they're not above the law. Board members aren't dictators, and homeowners have constitutional rights that no covenant can supersede. Standing up to abuse isn't just about winning. It's about setting precedents that protect everyone. A year after the initial confrontation on my doorstep, I got a letter from a homeowner in Phoenix dealing with a similar situation. Her HOA president was demanding entry to her home based on an anonymous complaint. She'd read about my case and wanted advice. I spent 2 hours on the phone with her, walking through her rights, explaining the legal framework, and helping her draft a response that was firm but professional. She didn't need to file a lawsuit. The threat of one based on the precedent from my case was enough. Her HOA backed down immediately. That became a pattern. I started getting calls and emails from people across Arizona, then from other states, all dealing with overreaching HOAs. I couldn't represent everyone, but I could provide guidance, share resources, and connect people with local attorneys who could help. Marcus and I even co-authored an article for a legal journal about HOA governance and constitutional limits. It argued that courts needed to scrutinize HOA actions more carefully, and that homeowners needed better protection against abuse of power. The article was cited in several cases around the country, contributing to a growing body of law that limited HOA authority. My own neighborhood thrived under Linda's leadership. She organized community events, maintained common areas without being tyrannical about minor violations, and fostered a genuine sense of community rather than fear. People actually showed up to HOA meetings now, not because they were afraid of being fined, but because they wanted to participate in decisions affecting the neighborhood. Richard, the board member who'd been with Karen that first day, apologized to me at one of those meetings. "I knew it was wrong," he admitted, "but I was scared of her too. She made it clear that if you weren't with her, you were against her, and she'd make your life hell." I understood. Bullies thrive when good people are too afraid to stand up to them. That's why it was so important that I had stood up, that Linda had found the courage to come forward, and that the legal system had worked the way it was supposed to. 2 years after everything started, I was invited to speak at a national HOA management conference in Las Vegas. The organizers wanted me to discuss the case and its implications for HOA governance. I almost declined. Public speaking wasn't really my thing, but Marcus convinced me it was important. The ballroom was packed with HOA board members, property managers, and attorneys from across the country. I told them the story, from Karen's threats on my doorstep to her sentencing. I talked about the importance of respecting homeowner rights, the dangers of unchecked authority, and the need for transparency and accountability in HOA governance. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping, and soon the entire room was applauding. During the question and answer session, person after person stood up to share their own stories, either as victims of HOA abuse or as board members trying to prevent it. One woman from Colorado talked about her HOA president, who'd been embezzling funds for 5 years before anyone caught on. A man from Florida described an HOA that had become so restrictive that homeowners couldn't paint their front doors without board approval. A property manager from Texas admitted that she'd quit her job after being pressured to enforce rules she knew were unreasonable and possibly illegal. The conversation went on for over an hour past the scheduled time. When it finally ended, dozens of people came up to talk to me, to share their stories, to ask for advice. I gave out my email address and offered to help however I could. Flying home from Las Vegas, I reflected on how a single confrontation on my doorstep had spiraled into something much larger than I'd anticipated. I'd stood up for my rights because it was the right thing to do, because I had the knowledge and resources to fight back. But the impact had reached far beyond my own situation. It had empowered others, changed policies, and contributed to a national conversation about the balance between community governance and individual rights. Karen Montgomery was serving her sentence at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. I'd heard through the grapevine that she'd tried to appeal her conviction, but the appellate court had upheld the verdict and the sentence. She wouldn't be eligible for parole for at least 6 years. I didn't take any pleasure in her imprisonment. Prison should be about rehabilitation and justice, not revenge. But I did feel satisfied that she'd been held accountable, that her victims had been heard, and that she could no longer abuse her authority to hurt people. Linda continued to do an excellent job as HOA president. Under her leadership, the Meadowbrook Hills community had become a model for how HOAs should operate. She was firm when necessary, but always fair. She enforced rules that made sense and advocated for changing or eliminating ones that didn't. Most importantly, she treated homeowners with respect and recognized that they weren't subjects to be ruled over, but neighbors sharing a community. The elderly man whose garage had been violated became one of my good friends. His name was Walter, and he was a retired engineer with fascinating stories about building bridges across the Southwest. We'd have coffee sometimes, and he'd always thank me for standing up to Karen. "You gave me my peace of mind back," he'd say. "I can sleep in my own home without worrying someone's going to break in and judge my belongings." The single mother, Tamara, successfully fought back against the fines Karen had levied against her. With the evidence from the criminal case, she was able to prove that the fines had been fraudulent and motivated by personal animus. The reformed HOA board not only waived the fines but issued her a formal apology. 3 years after the initial incident, I was working in my garden when a moving truck pulled up to the house across the street. A young family was moving in, a couple with 2 small children. I walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, shaking the husband's hand. "I'm Lucas Davidson." "Oh," the wife's eyes widened. "You're the lawyer who sued the HOA. We read about that. That's actually one of the reasons we chose this neighborhood. We wanted somewhere with an HOA that respected homeowners." We chatted for a while as their kids ran around the yard. They asked about the neighborhood, about the HOA, about whether there were any weird rules they needed to know about. I assured them that, under Linda's leadership, the HOA was reasonable and focused on genuine community welfare rather than petty enforcement. "What happened to the old president?" the husband asked. "She went to prison for burglary and embezzlement." His jaw dropped. Seriously. But that's all behind us now. You picked a good time to move here." As I walked back to my house, I realized how far we'd come. The neighborhood that had once been ruled by fear and intimidation was now a genuinely pleasant place to live. Children played in the streets. Neighbors talked to each other without worrying about being reported for violations. And people took pride in their community because they felt ownership of it, not because they were afraid of fines. My legal practice had evolved too. While I still did constitutional law work, I developed a specialty in HOA litigation, representing homeowners fighting abusive associations. I'd won several significant cases, setting precedents that strengthened homeowner rights and limited HOA overreach. I'd also worked with state legislators on bills to reform HOA governance and provide better protections for homeowners. One case in particular stood out. I represented a veteran in Tucson whose HOA was trying to prevent him from installing a wheelchair ramp, claiming it violated architectural guidelines. We argued that the Fair Housing Act required reasonable accommodations for disabilities, and that architectural preferences couldn't override civil rights. The case went to the Arizona Supreme Court, and we won a unanimous decision that established clear guidelines for when HOAs must accommodate disability-related modifications. The veteran, a man named James who'd lost his legs in Afghanistan, cried when I told him about the decision. "I fought for this country," he said, "and then I came home and had to fight just to get into my own house. Thank you for making sure other people won't have to go through this." That case, like my own experience with Karen Montgomery reminded me why I'd become a lawyer in the first place. The law isn't just abstract principles and dusty books. It's the tool we use to protect the vulnerable, to check abusive power, and to ensure that rights matter in real, practical ways. 5 years after Karen Montgomery pounded on my door demanding entry to my home, I stood in front of the Arizona State Legislature testifying in support of the Homeowner Bill of Rights Act. The bill, which I'd helped draft, would provide comprehensive protections against HOA abuse, require transparency in HOA governance, limit fine amounts, and establish a state office to investigate complaints. Members of the legislature, I said, HOAs serve millions of Arizonans. When they function properly, they maintain property values and foster community. But when they're run by people who abuse their authority, they become instruments of oppression in people's own homes. This bill doesn't eliminate HOAs or prevent them from enforcing legitimate rules. It simply ensures that they operate within reasonable bounds and respect homeowners' basic rights. No one should have to hire a lawyer and fight a years-long battle just to feel safe in their own home. The bill passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law by the governor. Linda Foster was there at the signing ceremony, representing the reformed Meadowbrook Hills HOA. She'd become an advocate for HOA reform, working with other associations across the state to implement best practices and prevent the kind of abuse that had characterized Karen's tenure. "We supported this bill," Linda told the assembled reporters, "because we learned the hard way what happens when there aren't enough checks on HOA authority. Good governance requires accountability, transparency, and respect for homeowners. This law helps ensure that every HOA in Arizona operates that way." I received a letter a few weeks after the bill signing. It was from Karen Montgomery, forwarded through the prison system. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten on prison stationery. Karen's handwriting was shaky, and several sentences were crossed out and rewritten. She apologized for what she'd done, claiming she'd been stressed and had lost sight of what was important. She said prison had given her time to reflect on her actions, and that she understood now how wrong she'd been. She asked for my forgiveness. I read the letter twice, trying to determine if it was genuine or just an attempt to help her parole case someday. In the end, I decided it didn't matter. Whether her remorse was real or not, the damage she'd caused was real, and so were the consequences she was facing. I filed the letter away and didn't respond. Forgiveness was something she'd have to work out with herself and her victims. My role had been to stand up to her abuse and to use the legal system to hold her accountable. That job was done. 10 years after everything started, I sat on my back patio watching the sunset over the desert. My home, the place Karen Montgomery had tried to violate, was peaceful and secure. The neighborhood around me thrived under fair governance. Across Arizona and beyond, homeowners had stronger protections thanks to the legal precedents and legislative reforms that had come from standing up to one abusive HOA president. Marcus joined me on the patio, bringing 2 beers. We'd remained close friends and frequent collaborators on HOA cases. "You know," he said, settling into a chair, "I was thinking about that morning when you called me, when Karen first showed up demanding entry to your house. Did you have any idea it would turn into all this?" I laughed. "Not even remotely. I just knew I wasn't going to let some power-hungry HOA president bully me in my own home. You did more than that. You changed the whole landscape of HOA law in this state." "We changed it," I corrected. "You, me, Linda, every homeowner who stood up and shared their story." Change doesn't happen because one person gets angry. It happens because people work together to make things better. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep blue. Somewhere in the neighborhood, kids were playing. Someone was having a barbecue, the smell of grilling meat drifting on the evening breeze. It was ordinary and peaceful and good. That was what home was supposed to be. Not a place where you lived in fear of petty tyrants with clipboards. Not a place where someone could threaten to enter without permission and search for violations. Home was supposed to be safe, private, sacred. I'd fought to protect that principle, and in doing so, I'd helped protect it for countless others. That was worth all the stress, all the confrontations, all the time spent in courtrooms and legislative chambers. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I thought about Karen Montgomery one more time. She tried to use her authority to violate my home and intimidate me into submission. Instead, she'd run into someone who knew his rights and had the tools to defend them. Her abuse of power had led to her downfall and to reforms that would prevent others from following in her footsteps. There was a lesson in that, I thought. Bullies count on people being too afraid or too ignorant to fight back. When someone stands up, when someone says, "No, you don't have that authority, and I'm going to hold you accountable," the whole dynamic changes. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA was having its annual community picnic next weekend. Linda had invited everyone in the neighborhood, and the response had been enthusiastic. People actually wanted to participate in their community now, wanted to know their neighbors, wanted to be part of something positive. That was the real victory, I realized. Not the settlement money, not even the criminal convictions. The real victory was that people felt safe and respected in their own neighborhood. They didn't have to worry about coming home to find someone had entered their house without permission. They didn't have to walk on eggshells afraid of being fined for trivial violations. They could just live their lives. As I headed inside for the night, I locked my door, a simple action that meant something different now than it had 10 years ago. It wasn't just securing my home against random intruders. It was a symbol of the boundary between public and private, between community interest and personal sovereignty, between legitimate governance and tyrannical abuse. Karen Montgomery had tried to erase that boundary, and she'd paid the price. The law had worked, justice had been served, and the principle had been defended. That was all any lawyer could ask for. I turned off the lights and went to bed in my home, my castle, my private sanctuary that no HOA president or anyone else could violate without facing serious consequences. Tomorrow I'd wake up and maybe help another homeowner fighting a similar battle. But tonight, I could rest easy knowing that the fight I'd fought had mattered, had made a difference, and had helped ensure that constitutional rights meant something even in the mundane world of homeowner associations. The story that had started with angry pounding on my door and threats of illegal entry had ended with reform, accountability, and justice. It was a good ending, the kind that reminded me why I devoted my life to the law in the first place. Rights matter, privacy matters, home matters. And when someone tries to violate those principles, it's worth standing up and fighting back, no matter how long it takes or how difficult it becomes. I fell asleep that night with a clear conscience and a peaceful heart, surrounded by the walls of my home that I'd successfully defended against those who thought their authority gave them the right to violate it. That was a victory worth celebrating, even 10 years later.